Rock and Roll Grad School with your hosts Heidi Edquist and Luke Poling.
Hello, kiddies. We're going to have a real good time together. We have Ann Magnuson. This is what we're doing. This is the thing now. Okay.
I know.
All right. You just make this face just like, oh, here we go again.
No. You always look at me like you're confused when you have to say it. Do you
Well,
want
I
me
just
to say hello, kitties? Like
I feel very self-conscious because you're giving me this look like I'm about to introduce Stairway, and you're just like, oh, can we just wrap this up and get to the damn song?
At least it's not Freebird.
I know, but because what we were saying last week that our show is the Moby Dick drum solo of music podcasts.
It is.
So continuing with the Zeppelin analogy,
That's good.
I'm trying to clearly explain to the audience what Jamaica's really about, and you're just like in the background doing the wrap it up sign with your fingers.
I'm in Mordor. I'm that girl so rare.
I know. Does anybody remember Laughter?
Right? Gollum and the evil ones.
So, but Anne is lovely, and if you go to her website,
yes,
I don't think we're here to hawk stuff completely.
No,
but mostly we are. But if you go to her website, her store has got some amazing stuff in it, and she said she's adding more.
Yes,
but she's got some amazing stickers and magnets of a picture of David Bowie that she drew as a teenager, and her new album has got one of these puppet characters on the front of it.
Yes.
And as you listen to the podcast, you will understand of which we are all speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think we both came away from it appreciating her work all the more.
Oh yeah, no, she's brilliant.
And but maybe me just a little bit more.
No, she's fantastic. And weirdly, we have a lot of puppets on both of our shows in 1 week.
That's true.
It's like a cross promotion without even realizing.
You're right. I didn't even think about that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you like puppetry, whythepodcast.com. We have a puppet engineer.
Yes. If you like films, music, performance art.
David Bowie.
The flight attendant.
Mm-hmm. I feel like Anne has got to be one of the few people ever killed on screen by David Bowie.
I think that's accurate.
Is it like her and Willem Dafoe? I think you could argue.
Which, I mean, that's a pretty good list to be on, right?
Right, because it wasn't Bowie Pontius Pilate in Last Temptation?
Yes.
I mean, he didn't actually.
No, right.
Like, he didn't kill him on screen.
I understand. Thank you. Thank you for bringing it back for me. I appreciate it.
Okay. I was just trying to explain.
I mean, the Goblin King didn't kill anybody.
So while we're here, let's record at least the intro for Anne. And then we could also...
Your new best friend.
Are we best friends?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'll take it.
Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah.
It's time for you to have a friend of your own.
Thank you. You've decided.
I have lots of friends now, thanks to our shows.
Right. You and Ted, you and Nikki.
Mm-hmm. Me and Jules.
How soon we forget.
Me and Tawny.
Oh, yeah. That's right. No, it's nice. And I think Anne, fascinating person.
Completely.
Really interesting stuff. And she kept complaining while we talked that she was rambling.
No, she was great.
Nobody wants to hear no one wants to hear our yapping.
No, I'd much rather hear hers.
Yeah, that's not why you come to the show.
No, and her career is like beyond across the board.
It's insane.
Yeah, and I feel like our listeners will see her name and recognize it, but they'll all recognize it from these different corners of the earth. And when they listen and they all converge, it will be very confusing and very exciting all at once.
And I mean, to that point, I feel like anybody who in a, we cut it down a little bit, but overall, the whole conversation ran about 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who very casually throws out, "Oh, and then David Fincher said to me," as like "Oh, this was a thing I did."
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Right.
And we finally get to the bottom of some rock and roll myth, legend. And if you go to YouTube and search rock and roll grad school, we have visual evidence of what we're discussing, which is always very nice.
Yes, trying to do more of that.
I don't even know where to start, because your career is so fascinating, and it covers, it seems like everything you do is connected to art and is part of your art. Do you feel that way?
Yeah. I actually haven't really defined that for myself, but I just live it,
Mm-hmm.
I think growing up in with a mother who was really interested in culture and being exposed to so much culture, basically through the television or music or radio or books or movies, because growing up in the Kanawha Valley of West Virginia, it was a bit isolated, but there was a satellite system, so we did get information, and we traveled a fair amount within the state. So I was just exposed to a lot of different forms of creativity. My maternal grandmother sewed a lot and played the piano and had every Life magazine that had ever been printed in stacks in her attic, and I was obsessed with going through all of those.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I was just very exposed to all that from day one, so it just became part of my life, and the DNA, and that my mother, she wasn't as bad as like those, what are they called, those tiger moms? The ones who force their children to never have a moment free of just achieving. She wasn't like that. But I was taken to a lot of different lessons, ballet, piano. There was a wonderful little children's museum that was set up in the governor's old mansion that was up in the hills where we lived in Charleston, West Virginia. And they had a small planetarium there. We took astronomy classes. I took a puppetry class in second grade. I was involved in the community theater. So also took horseback riding lessons. And the schools back then had a lot of, you were exposed to the arts. We had music classes. We had art classes. Or they were kind of like a music hour or an art hour where you would listen to something and then do a drawing about it. I mean, all these artistic modes of expression seem interconnected naturally, so I guess that's what I grew up with, and that's what I ended up engaging in.
Well, it's so interesting too, sort of to Luke's point, you've ended up engaging in them, but in such a fascinating and incredible way, because you've so many people either are exposed to those things and then they rebel against them and never go to another play as long as they live. Others may pick one path and just sort of stick to that or use it but you've embraced so many art forms into one beautiful career and passion that is you. And I think that's why both of us were, Luke and I both were like, oh my gosh, there's so much. She's just done so many incredible things. And you've just done it all.
But I think also growing up with a television that was on quite frequently, and there were only 3 channels, and everybody my age always talks about endlessly changing channels. It kind of like scrolling now, but you would only be, whereas today you can choose what you want to look at, even if you're going down various rabbit holes. You're kind of in control. Back then you weren't in control, so whatever came up is what you watched, and therefore one was exposed to a lot of different points of view and ideas. Unfortunately, also dictated by whatever the programmers wanted to show. But there was a lot of wacky stuff on television in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And you grew up watching Bewitched, where you wiggle your nose and you can make anything happen. And then growing up in West Virginia, you're also exposed to all these heavy-duty back hills evangelicals who are preaching from the radio, and sometimes they would buy the really cheap TV time at the first thing in the morning, because there wasn't anything broadcast on TV from midnight to about 6 a.m. There was nothing. So the first thing in the morning was usually something very bizarre because the time was cheap. Bizarre is, that's right. a relative term, but you would get people who were doing their own TV shows, kind of like public access, which I got completely obsessed with in the 80s when that became a thing, because real people are far more interesting than professionals. But you would have, usually they were a family unit of folks playing backwoods music, country music, and doing some preaching. So that had a big effect on me. And my grandfather, Magnuson, was a Swedish evangelical. He was actually a Presbyterian as well, but in the early days he preached to immigrant communities in Wisconsin and the Midwest. And I did not know him, but my grandmother was a true believer, but in a very, very laissez-faire way. She was not a crazed right-winger by any stretch of the imagination. She admired Eleanor Roosevelt and was really funny person who never threw anything away because they grew up in such poverty during the Depression. And she had this sewing room full. She had bolts of fabric and yarn and sequins and all these things crammed into this back room where her piano was, where she would play hymns. And she taught me how to sew when I was about 12, and then I really got into sewing. And as a little baby hippie, I would make my own hippie clothes. And then I bring this up because I've gotten, during the pandemic and the lockdown, I picked that hobby back up, the sewing, and I've been creating all these pieces that I've incorporated into the YouTube series we did, What the Fuck 2020, and about the pandemic. And I actually sold one of the title pieces at an art show. This woman, Sarah Gavlak, has a very well-respected gallery here in Los Angeles, and she had a show of all female artists called Nasty Women. And she showed one of my, just the title, it said Sirens. It was one of the episodes because it was during the Black Lives Matter, the heavy-duty protests over George Floyd, that period. And that whole series was basically our diary of like what we're reacting to. Me and my collaborator Adam do this, and I use these dolls that my grandmother made for her grandchildren. These very bizarre pipe cleaner dolls that have crocheted faces, and so that's incorporated into that series. And during the there were some heavy demonstrations, and I don't know if you'd call them rioting. I guess Fox News would call it rioting. There was a lot of mischief going on, and the sirens in Los Angeles were just nonstop. So we made an episode called Sirens, and I made a title piece of the sewing for that, and it sold at this gallery to this rather cool art collector. So I'm really excited about doing more of that, and I've created so many of these, I'm calling them stash bags, and I'm going to start selling those online. But there's something just presented itself to me. I'm out here in Joshua Tree, where we've had a place for 17 years. But it's getting gentrified like everywhere else I've been. Of course. So we'll see how long we last here.
Right. How long the magic stays.
Where can I go to get away from this the Airbnb insanity? But I have some friends, Steve Hall and Glenn Stiegelman, who have a place out here called The Station, and you can Google it. They've got a great Instagram account with lots of great images. They took over an old gas station and refurbished it and redid it, kind of inspired by 1970s head shops and tourist attractions that one used to see around the country back in the old days, for people my age. So they create their own souvenirs for Joshua Tree, and they're going to make this. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but they're going to create this section connected to the station that's specifically psychedelic.
Nice.
Because people do like to come out to Joshua Tree for that particular experience.
Of course.
So I'm going. He asked me to set up a little shop there to sell my psychedelic oriented sewing projects, because, and it's going to be, I think I can say this, I had, when I was a little baby hippie, after my grandmother taught me how to sew and I would make things for my friends and myself, I took over this room in our house. It was the sewing room, and I called it the psychedelic sewing room. And I decorated it with, you could buy these like groovy 60s, it was probably late 60s, early 70s, decals of daisies, and I'd take out pictures of different models from magazines, and I remember and paste them up on the bookshelves and decorated it up. And one of the models was Susan Day. Before she was in the Partridge Family, she modeled a bunch of, groovy early 70s outfits.
Yeah.
So I'm reviving the Psychedelic Sewing Room, which was also the title of a Bongwater song, which was about the original Psychedelic Sewing Room.
It's so fascinating.
It's all coming full circle.
It is. It is. I love it.
It's so fascinating to hear you talk about sort of where you came from and all the things that were part of your childhood and your early years. And just it all gets fed back into your art. It all gets fed back into the music. It's so fascinating. I feel like when we talk to musicians and other artists, you just don't see it coming out in every pore of somebody's being, that just everything is this chance to go, well, what can I do with this? And I think your YouTube series is the perfect example of that, where I would think most people would take these stuffed animal figures and set them aside and kind of go, oh, that was a nice time. But you're like, well, what are they doing now? How can what are they saying now?
Oh yes, Dust Bunny. I wanted to do a whole, Dust Bunny has this whole backstory of why I can't decide if Dust Bunny is going to be non-binary or.
I know. Dust Bunny feels non-binary.
Yeah, Dust Bunny is definitely that way. But most people want to call Dust Bunny a she, so I just go with it. But there's a whole backstory, because I used that voice in one of the tracks for my album Dream Girl, called Bromance Nightmare, which was a dream. I I dream very vividly, pretty much every night. And, well, I guess we all dream all night. Every human being dreams. Not every human being remembers them, and certainly not every human being writes them down and then uses them in projects. Jim Shaw, when I met Jim Shaw back in the 80s here in LA, he was using dreams a lot, and we really connected on that because I was using dreams even prior to meeting him in the Bongwater albums, because I started writing them down back in the late 70s or early 80s. Actually, I found some since that were even earlier than that. But I started to write them down very religiously in the early 80s because some of them were just so kooky. I wanted to read them back. I remember calling Kenny Scharf one morning saying, "Oh, you cannot believe this dream I had. It was so real." And of course, it was about being taken by an alien spaceship to this up. They sucked me up into the spaceship after there had been a big dogfight with jet planes around the World Trade Center.
Oh.
This happened like in 1980.
Yeah.
And then the spaceship, there was a divine intervention through the extraterrestrials who I went zooming up the light beam went down and I went up. And I think this was even kind of before that became such a prevalent image. I just saw that. I just saw it the other day at the Joshua Tree Health Food. Somebody had made a T-shirt of the alien light beam, somebody going up the light beam of the alien spaceship. But I think all this stuff is all Jungian psychology. I mean, they're archetypes that go back since the beginning of history and prehistory, that human beings have these shared the collective subconscious and their archetypal imagery that were used in to create deities and gods and goddesses and totems and various religious artifacts. And this stuff is all swimming around. And for me, I think I just grew up getting exposed to these archetypes that were being reconfigured and sent over the airways. And then it got into my brain and then came out in these other configurations. And that's kind of what art is, isn't it? I mean, they're Jungian archetypes that people are playing with.
Mm-hmm.
Whether really, really specific images or just shapes. It's all very fascinating. I got very, very fascinated with Carl Jung several years ago and just devoured everything I could out, all that. I'm also gone off on a tangent that I don't remember.
No, we're good. We're good. We like tangents. The best stuff's always in tangents.
Yeah, I speak fluent tangent. But so the dreams, I would write them down, and I think that first one was so I could really tell Kenny Scharf exactly what happened because it was so real. And he and I, of course, share so many similar sensibilities, particularly about outer space, having grown up with NASA and the space program and the moon landing and all that optimism and what human beings could do that was positive, even though that was all going on during the Vietnam War, which we watched every night during dinner because the TV was always on. And one can despair and think, well, this is what an awful time and all these awful things are going on, and how did human beings get to this point? And now we have this pandemic, and how I know young people who haven't gone through any of this. My generation went through the AIDS plague. Mm-hmm. So it's like we're going through this again and having to pull out the tools from our toolbox that we had trying to get through that, which left many of us with severe trauma, as you can imagine. And I guess everybody going through this is having trauma issues. But then, I look back in history. My father was a big history buff, and I got into that and still am into that. But that Vietnam War was just so horrific and awful. And yet at the same time, you look at TV variety shows from the 60s, and the music at the same time was so positive and upbeat and optimistic, and yet you have these horrific killing fields that we are responsible for. I mean, one could have arguments about that. Who's responsible? It's multi-layered reasoning. But the United States was napalming villages, and we were watching children our age with their skin being burned off. Yeah. And at the same time, there's this, we're going to space, we're going to land a man on the moon, and there's this just wild, crazy juxtapositions that is the essence of life.
And I think that's something that personally I'm drawn to, especially in your music projects, because it does seem such this combination of comedy and tragedy and very light, superfluous entertainment and a very strong, heavy political statement. It's just fascinating to see you play with all these tropes, and the way you put them out there is just it's so fascinating. It's so unique.
Oh, well, thank you. It means a lot to just hear from somebody who gets it and appreciates it. I really means a lot. Thank you. Always good. We just watched this documentary on the Smothers Brothers. Are you familiar with them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course.
And they were a huge influence on me. I love the Smothers Brothers, but I also loved, one of my first loves was Bugs Bunny. And also, I was always liked satire, but political satire. And Bugs Bunny was kind of a troublemaker, but was always getting, but a goofball, getting the best, like working these goofy angles against somebody who's trying to kill him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what you got to do in life. And the Smothers Brothers, by their own admission, didn't really start out to be, they didn't start out to get canceled. But with the Vietnam War and what was going on, how can they not make commentary about what's happening?
Right.
But I always liked the Trojan horse approach, that you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. But you come in with fun, because we all want that, joy. But there's other stuff going on, and you bring it in. You bring the Trojan horse into the gates as a gift, and then you let the soldiers out afterwards.
Right.
But not to slaughter the populace. Just to I don't think it's not even something that I'm like, okay, now this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to fool them with this, and then we're going to put in this. It's not that way at all. It's I want to have joy in my life. I want to have joy when I'm on stage. I think the audience wants to have joy. And let's find a way to do that, but let's also remember what's going on out there, and maybe why, certainly for myself personally, why I need this joy. Because I don't want to get bogged down in the negativity, of which there's so much out there to get bogged down in, if you're predisposed to doing that. And I think I have some predisposition to that. My mother had some very severe depression, and back then they called it manic depressive. But I can't really, she's no longer alive. I can't really ethically diagnose her. But I saw the high highs and the low lows. Mm-hmm. And I saw the low lows destroy her, that she couldn't get past this well of sadness or certain things that didn't go her way. And that made a big impression on me real early on. And my maternal grandmother, was the opposite. She was the glass is half full. My mother could get very glass half empty. And it's like, damn it, I am not going to be the glass is half empty person. I am not going to let this precious time on earth be dictated by that mindset. So if I have to work harder to get over to the other side, I'm going to do it.
Yeah. Well, even then, you've got your model, I guess. There's a little bit, but not the same. Not the same at all. I just revisited your Red Cross video. I love that song. You were the inspiration for, and your portrayal in the video is just so awesome.
I wasn't the inspiration for that.
Really? I've always heard you were. See, I love getting the truth.
I thought that myself. I thought, oh my God, did they think I'm that crazy?
Oh, I love her. I would be proud
Michael,
to be that crazy.
Well, Michael, listen, I restrained myself. I've got stuff that is so out there. One day I'm going to release it into the world. It was like Carl Jung. They wouldn't release the Red Book of his paintings and his thoughts about, like, his furthest, most out there theories and his paintings. The family would not release it because they were so afraid it would undermine his credibility, because it was so connected to the numinosum, the great mystery. And there are many things I've held back on, because this is just way, 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 way out there. And but I'm getting older now. I don't give a fuck. I'm going to start putting it out there, but I'm still kind of, I don't know. There's just so much to juggle. But something.
We're talking about Red Cross. And,
yeah.
And he's gone.
Michael Cudahy, who is known as the Millionaire. He had the band Combusto Edison back out of Chicago in the 90s. And he is out in LA, and we've collaborated a lot in the last several years. So he plays on Dream Girl. He played on him. He did a lot of this bizarre EP single I did called Open Letter to an Open Letter. He did a lot of the music on that. And he was commissioned to write a song for Red Cross. He wrote that song. And the Annie in that song is the character in the movie Foxes with Jodie Foster.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Cherie Currie played Annie.
Yep.
And Annie has the overdose. This is a spoiler alert for anyone who
right, anyone who hasn't seen it yet.
Which is such a genius movie about
it is.
that period of time, about oh my God, that party scene, that teenage party scene. Oh. We've all been in that
yes.
madness. But it's based on that character, Annie. And I think somebody might have said towards the end, Annie's gone. That's what that song, what it was written about. And then I guess the folklore of the internet.
Yep. It totally did. It did. Well, yeah.
Something else. But anyway, that's what he told me.
It's still a great song, and you're still like in the video, you're just phenomenal. So whether it was about you or not, it looked fun.
That. Oh, it was so much fun. We were laughing our asses off. Because when I discovered Red Cross before they were, well, other people knew about him. When I came to LA, I'd never heard of them. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Guys are the best.
They are. They're just
and I used to see them live, and so I got to know them, and there was a whole bunch of us going to the same places and frequenting the same, God, what are they even called anymore? Restaurants, stores, music venues, art galleries. So I got to know them, and Rocky Schenk, who was an incredible photographer, and I was working with him. He was doing portraits, and then he started doing music videos. He did music videos for the Cramps that are really spectacular, and the Red Cross wanted him to do this, and so all this got devised that I would be this character. And my friend Pilar Lemosner, who's a costume designer, went and found the kookiest things she could find at Western Costume, and we went for it. We just went for it and laughed our asses off. And Rocky recently posted some outtakes. I think it was on Instagram. I don't know if they're still up or not, and they're so nutty. They're even nuttier than the stuff that was in there. It's kind of amazing that I guess there was a lot of freedom back then for a nanosecond for certain bands.
Yeah. Hot minute.
Yeah, but that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to do. Many opportunities to be that whacked out, you know.
Right.
Yeah. You got to try them.
And weirdly now, they want to cast me as these very buttoned down, stern, emotionless women.
The flight attendant. Yeah. Which
like Star Trek Picard, and then the flight attendant.
Right.
I don't understand this, but I need to pay my bills and get health insurance, and I'm enjoying working with the people on those shows, and it's fine by me, but this is so not who I am.
Shows that you're a good actress. You can be someone so different.
They just keep telling me, don't do anything, do less, do less, do less. That was David Fincher would always be telling me some version of that when we did Panic Room. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to stand here. That's all you want. They'll do it. But this is work? Well, with David Fincher it is, because you have to do a gazillion takes and reshoots. But I would work with him in a second again, because you get so much overtime and extra money for reshoots.
Right.
Also, I found him very fun to work with.
Which is not always an
exacting professional. Yeah. But he's also got a very wicked sense of humor, which I appreciate.
So I have two questions. One's deeper than the other. So we'll go deep first. But what are you working on now? What are you looking forward to sharing with everybody? You've got the WTF video still going?
No, that we gave it an ending, and it's just very hard to do these things on your own without any funding whatsoever. And I'd give Adam some money just because he's putting all the work into it as the editor. There's a lot of sitting there at the computer time. But he and I we just did a scene that for a Tennessee Williams festival that's fundraiser going to air on March 26th, but you have to pay to see it. From Suddenly Last Summer, so I dug into my southern roots for some of that Tennessee Williams vibe. The most exciting thing is this psychedelic sewing room kiosk store that I'm going to be involved with, and making 3D art. But I'm also excited about getting my second COVID shot next week. And then I'm going to West Virginia. I'm not going to let this stop me. Nothing's going to stop me now from going back to West Virginia, because West Virginia University is going to give me an honorary doctorate in the arts. And I did not go there, but my parents both went there. My brother went there. I probably should have gone there, but I had to be contrarian, I guess. But my grandmother lived in Morgantown, where WVU is, and it's such an honor. This is such a huge honor. So I'm going to take my chances and triple mask and get on an airplane and go to West Virginia. And I wanted to go back anyway because I want to do a collaboration with some musicians there on music and songs about growing up in West Virginia. So that's somewhat on the horizon in the distant future. I have all these home movies that my dad took of us growing up, and I'd like to incorporate that into a documentary type tone poem about West Virginia. And I'd like to somehow create a way to have an artist connection back and forth between Joshua Tree and West Virginia, because I think the landscapes are quite different, but there's a rural sensibility and something that occurs in a landscape where there are very few people that has a magic quality that comes out in the art. And I think both places, it would be neat to have some kind of exchange program between the two locations. I don't know, I'm just sort of thinking in lines like that, trying to instigate another club. Atmosphere, but not really I don't know what it's going to be. But just working on more music, a memoir that I have an outline for the early days in the 80s. God, I have a whole list.
Couple things.
Yeah, I mean,
one or two things
will come up. Stuff will come up that I haven't planned for, which is the best stuff. That's always great. Adam and I want to do. We're definitely going to work on another video collaboration. I did a video in 1984 with a video artist named Tom Rubinus called Made for TV, and for the longest time I've wanted to do Made for TV 2. And now I want, so I've got an idea for it. It's called Made for TV 2, Old Lady. All old lady characters. So we hope to work on that this year. And I'm trying to I've got some Hollywood people I've got to try to put some pressure on to see if they can help me get my 1987 Cinemax special Vandemonium re-released, at least put it on DVD or get it online so people can see it.
And so my last question sounds even more vacuous if I refer to you as Dr. Magnuson when I ask it.
Yeah, hey, I don't think that's going to probably stick.
Well, it's worth a shot.
Yeah,
but it's an amazing thing. It means so much to be recognized by my home state. I got inducted in the West Virginia Music Hall of Fame in 2018. That was the last time I was back there, and that meant the world to me. And what was so exciting is also in the class of 2018 was Hazel Adkins, who sort of set the bar for complete insanity, wildness in music and performance, certainly from West Virginia, and Fred Sonic Smith, who was in MC5, who was born in West Virginia or spent time in West Virginia. Anyway, he qualified to be inducted, and Patti Smith was there with her kids and Lenny Kaye to accept the award. So I got to hang out with them, and Michael Lipton, who runs the West Virginia Hall of Fame, is a very tenacious guy. He wanted he wanted me to see if Kate Pearson, who I knew, would come down and induct me into the Hall of Fame. And I said, oh, there's no way I'm going to ask her to come to West Virginia in the middle of winter. And I said, oh, please, please. I said, all right. And I asked her, and she said yes.
That's great.
Wow.
That's friends do.
Randy Hudson, who was in Bongwater, and I put together a very tight 12-minute medley because I was told you only get 12 minutes because it's going to be on West Virginia Public Television. I found out nobody else really adhered to that time, but it was good. It was like we rehearsed the shit out of that medley, and it went great. And Charlie McCoy, who's one of the most famous, he is the most famous harmonica player who's played for Bob Dylan and everybody, every country western person you can. He was there, and I'm going to start crying because it was just the most moving. We got our rehearsal, and he came up to me because he was next on the lineup, and he gave me this thumbs up, and he told me how good it was, and I started crying. He gave me a hug, and thought, there is no award, there's nothing better than this. Because when you go back there, everyone's just so nice and supportive in that artistic community. And the Mountain Stage, which is a radio show that's been going on for a long time there, everybody plays on it. It is just full of the best people. The best people.
Is it you or only what you do that is so glad?